Today's podcast is going to be tough, I think, for a lot of people, tough even for me, because it will challenge everything that you think you know. It may not be right, but I think in the end, the conclusion, the end product is right. But it's going to be tough because you're also going to be hearing phrases and words that you define one way that don't necessarily in this context mean that. And where it ends is transhumanism. No, where it ends is selling your birthright, which is salvation. Is there and has there been an alien race hiding in plain sight in the book of Genesis, throughout the Old Testament and in the New Testament? Are we going to see a return of the gods? I think we are. And I understand it in a completely different way. Welcome, explorer, teacher, real-life Indiana Jones, and the author of Birthright, The Coming Post-Human Apocalypse and the Usurpation of Adam's Dominion on Earth. Welcome to the podcast, Timothy Alberino. Tim, I have spoken to prime ministers and presidents and philosophers and religious leaders of all kind. I think I am more intrigued by this next hour than anybody I have ever spoken to. You have led a fascinating life, and I don't know exactly what to think of your theories yet, but they are so worth thinking about. So welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you for having me, Glenn. I'm delighted to be with you.
Yeah. Can we start with you growing up living with monkeys in the jungle?
An appropriate place to start, I believe.
Right.
I dropped out of high school. Well, I've dropped out / got kicked out of high school when I was 18. And by a very circuitous route, I ended up in Peru. So I was 18 years old, living in the Amazon, the Peruvian Amazon. Learning Spanish, and as you said, living with monkeys. I was living on the outskirts of a town, jungle town called Tarapoto in the Amazon basin. And I was adapting to the culture very well. And one day I went down to the market, and in those times it was like an Indiana Jones movie. You walk into the market and they're selling all manner of fauna, all manner of jungle wildlife, jaguars and monkeys and parrots. And it's not that way anymore, but it was back then. And so I purchased a few different species of monkeys and proceeded to live with these animals up in my very primitive dwelling on the outskirts of town. And that's how I got inculcated in Peruvian culture and learned Spanish.
Okay. And so when you say you're kind of living this Indiana Jones thing, I mean, didn't you discover an ancient lost civilization?
Well, I was back in 2019. I've been doing various expeditions to Peru and elsewhere around the world, especially in Peru. And in 2019, me and my colleague, the renowned Spanish explorer Anselm P. Rambla, we went up into the Andes Mountains and we were looking for a lost Inca city. We had received information of a potential lost city in this particular area in the Andes. And so we mounted a couple of expeditions and we discovered it. And it's a remarkable place. It has not been published yet. It's the locals call it Tauripunku. And we think that it's a significant either Inca or pre-Inca city, perhaps belonging to the Chachapoyas people. We're not sure. But, you know, Peru, there's so much discovery left to be made in Peru. I consider Peru to be the last best place for making discoveries.
So talk to me, because this kind of turned your life kind of turned on megaliths. First, explain what a megalith is and how that turned you into where we're going here in a minute.
Well, when I was living in Peru, I had an opportunity I lived in Peru for 10 years. I had the opportunity to travel extensively around the country. And this is when I was first confronted with what are called megaliths. Megaliths are edifices, large edifices that are constructed with stones that are fitted together without the use of any kind of a bonding agent, so without the use of mortar. This is known in archaeology as cyclopean architectures. And yes, they're referring to the Cyclopes of Greek mythology, because the Greeks
The
believe...
one-eyed giants.
Precisely. Because
Yeah, okay.
the Greeks believe that these gigantic megalithic constructions that are found in Greece as well, throughout Greece, were constructed by the offspring of the gods, the one-eyed Cyclopes, and that this knowledge of megalith building had come from the gods. And in Peru, you have some of the most exquisite Cyclopean architecture on planet Earth. If you go to Cusco, as many people have visited Cusco en route to Machu Picchu, you will see the walls of Sacsayhuaman, which are one of the most impressive megalithic sites on planet Earth. And these are just mammoth walls that are constructed with solid blocks of stone, some of them weighing in excess of 200 tons, fitted together so tightly, the joints are so tight you can't stick a butter knife between them. And in the case of Sacsayhuaman, these are polygonal megalithic stones, which means they have sort of a pillowed look to them, as if they were not entirely hard when they were fitted together. Imagine a bunch of imagine taking pieces of Play-Doh and squishing it together. That's what these walls look like, or clay. And they're magnificent. The walls of Sacsayhuaman are magnificent. And indeed, when the conquistadors arrived to Sacsayhuaman and they beheld these magnificent megalithic walls, they concluded these could not have been made by human beings. They had to have been built by giants or demons or some supernatural power. Many people, in fact, almost everyone is familiar with the legendary Inca site of Machu Picchu. Well, the foundations of Machu Picchu are megalithic. And in the Quechua word for Machu Picchu is Ijampu. And Ijampu means, in Quechua, the abode of the gods. So the Inca themselves believed, and I think this is apparent, the Inca themselves believed that the megaliths were built by the gods, and that they, being the offspring of the gods, were the natural inheritors of the works of the gods. And so they re-inhabited and they rebuilt what they believed was the habitation of the gods. And you can find this, again, the megalithic constructions all over the earth, especially in Peru.
Right. So some of the stuff, like, for instance, the stones around the Sphinx that are cut out perfectly, and then moved whole, and they don't know how they were cut out of the rock, out of the ground, right?
What's interesting is if you look at the temples around the Sphinx, yes, there are megalithic constructions in Egypt, and you see the very same Cyclopean technique, as you see all over the earth. So when you look at the walls of Ollantaytambo in Peru, for example, and you see how they took a large block of, in some cases, andesite, in some cases, granite, they take a large block and they fit it into a corner. Now, if you and I are building an edifice with large blocks and we're going to create a corner joint, we're going to either stagger the blocks, like we do with bricks, or we're going to butt the blocks up together to create a nice clean joint. But these builders, these Cyclopean masons, they took the piece of stone and they literally curved it into the corner. They would curve the stone into the corner, which is exceedingly more difficult. They do this at the temple in front of the Sphinx, just like they do it in the walls of Ollantaytambo. This is the fingerprint of a ubiquitous knowledge that somebody had a long time ago on planet Earth, because I don't believe that the megaliths in Peru were built by the Inca, and I don't believe that some of the oldest, like the Sphinx, archaeological edifices on the Giza Plateau, for example, were built by the Egyptians. I think we're looking at technology and knowledge that comes from the antediluvian world, the world before the flood.
There's so many people living with everyday pain, they just think that they're stuck with it. That's the way it is, but it doesn't have to be. Let me tell you about Jeannie from Texas, her relief factor story. Jeannie was out for a walk when she was unfortunately hit by a car. Nothing she tried for her lower back pain worked. Her husband heard about relief factor, and so Jeannie said, sure, it's worth a try. Relief Factor worked beautifully for her pain. Her pain decreased, her range of motion increased, and she is grateful. And actually, she writes and says that's an understatement. If you're living with aches and pains, see how Relief Factor, a daily drug-free supplement, can help you feel better and live better every day. Give their 3-week quick start a try, $19.95. In a few weeks, even days, you might start feeling the difference Relief Factor can make. Over 1 million people have tried this. About 70% of them are still taking it every single day because it works for them. Don't get stuck with pain. Visit relieffactor.com. Call 800-4RELIEF. 800, the number 4, relief. I just want you to stick with this podcast because this is such a wild journey, and it's going to go into places where you're like, that's crazy. But we end up at transhumanism and AI and I think the Antichrist or mark of the beast. And I don't know exactly what to think of all this, but I think it is so worth your time to listen and to just think this through. Okay, let's start now with, and all we're doing is building a foundation. And when you see when you see what he's built, and then we start really talking about what's happening today, it's going to come together and you're going to be amazed. Let's start with the sons of God. And let me read this from Genesis. This is Genesis 6, 1 through 5. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, the daughters were born unto them. And the sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. The same became mighty men, of which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Okay. All right. We kind of know this story, but we always bypass the giants part. And the sons of God may be misinterpreted. Can you tell me your look at Genesis and why this is a foundational stone here?
Well, the first thing I would note is that you'll notice that no effort is made by the author of Genesis to elucidate the details of this peculiar digression in the Genesis narrative. It's just there. There's no explanation for it. And the reason for that is because the author presumes the reader's knowledge of this infamous affair. The story, therefore, must have been thoroughly chronicled elsewhere in the Hebraic scriptures and then widely disseminated, at least in oral tradition. So this is something that was known. The author of Genesis is making reference to this extraordinary event that is clearly very well known to the reader and documented elsewhere.
And what is the event? Because I had never heard this before. What is the event?
So the event is the sons of God. This term is B'nai Ha Elohim, and it never refers to human agents in the Old Testament. The term sons of God only and exclusively refers to angelic beings, to celestial beings. So we are right out of the gates here. We are not talking about human actors. And there's a theory called the Sons of Seth theory, which posits that the sons of God were just the noble offspring of Adam. And it's ridiculous because this tradition is so well known in ancient Hebrew cosmology. It forms the substratum to so much of what we read in the Old and in the New Testament, this incident. So what we're looking at are non-human beings, celestial beings, the sons of God, angelic entities who are observing the earth, who are watching the earth. This is why probably they're called watchers in the book of Daniel and elsewhere. And they're lusting after the daughters of Adam. And so they descend to the earth. They um, they take, as the book of Genesis says here in Genesis 6, they choose from among the daughters of men, women maidens that they ultimately wed, and then they procreate with these women. And the result is a race of giants. They progenerate a race of giants in the earth, and these giants are referred to in the biblical narrative as Nephilim. And that, so you have a problem if you think that these are human agents, just men, just normal human beings copulating with normal human women, normal human males with normal human women. How do you get giants as a result? How do they procreate Nephilim? It's the equation doesn't
Okay, so
work.
wait, explain what Nephilim is, because the translation for Nephilim is fallen one, right?
Well, that's disputed. A Nephilim is a giant. You can derive Nephilim from the Hebrew word nephal, which means to fall, but I think it comes from the Aramaic. I think that the late Dr. Michael Heiser had the right interpretation of the word Nephilim. It comes from the Aramaic, which is Nephilim, which means giants. And in the Greek, in the Septuagint, these beings are referred to as gigantes, as giants. So when you read Nephilim,
and we're not talking about figurative giants. We're talking about actual giants, like
yes.
Like what David fought.
Precisely, beings of gigantic stature. And in the antediluvian world, in the world before the flood, they were even larger than the post-flood giants, because they were in the world, and this is what Genesis says later, they were in the world both before the flood and after the flood. And obviously, we know that they're in the world after the flood, according to the biblical narrative. Joshua and the Hebrews are confronting these races of giants who are dispersed throughout Canaan, especially in the highlands. The Enochian, for example, who are the descendants of the Nephilim.
And there are, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, there were giants that were found here in America.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, yes. This is known as the Smithsonian Gate. It's the Smithsonian cover-up.
Right.
And there were the bones of giants being discovered all over America back from the mid-1800s back into the early 20th century, and primarily in the mounds, in the Indian mounds. There were thousands and thousands of Indian mounds, east of the Mississippi. And many of these mounds, according to the Smithsonian's own records, many of these mounds contained anomalous artifacts, especially the bones of giants and gigantic axes and all manner of strange artifact. And even what's remarkable is even Abraham Lincoln, while waxing poetically about Niagara Falls, makes reference to the bones of that ancient species of giants in the mounds. And it was well known. Okay. I mean, this was not conspiratorial back in the mid-1800s.
So who are these beings, these sons of God? Because they go very dark. Are they like the fallen ones? Are they angels that have?
So really, in order to get insight into this Genesis 6 affair again, which is a bizarre digression in the Genesis narrative, again, because the author is presuming that his audience is well informed. And has been informed from some other kind of tradition. This story is expounded in the Book of Enoch, and in the Book of Enoch, it delineates.
Wait, before you go there, talk about the Book of Enoch, because up until we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, we only saw it in Ethiopia. Thought it was the Ethiopians made it up 200 years ago, whatever. We find the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we now know that the Book of Enoch is from the ancient times, but it's an apocrypha book.
Yes, it's pseudepigraphical. Meaning that it claims to be written by a biblical author, but the authorship is unknown.
Okay.
So the Book of Enoch was rediscovered in 1773 by the Scottish explorer James Bruce of Cunard. This, by the way, is a collateral relative. James Bruce of Cunard is a collateral relative of the illustrious Robert the Bruce, who led the Scots to victory in their War of Independence against the English in the early 14th century. Robert the Bruce was also, incidentally, a Freemason of the Scottish Rite. And I think he was looking for the Ark of the Covenant. So he went to Ethiopia. And he discovered in Ethiopia, he brought back to England a copy, because he brought 2 copies back to England. One he delivered to the King of France on his way back home. 2 copies of the Book of Enoch, the Ethiopic Book of Enoch, which is called First Enoch, and it's written in Ge'ez, which is the liturgical language of the Ethiopians. And it turns out that although the Book of Enoch had not been accepted into the canons of the canons of the Jews, the canon of the Jews rather, and the canon of the Christians, it had been inducted into the canons of the Beta Israel Jews and the Orthodox Tawahedo Christians in Ethiopia. So the Book of Enoch disappeared. It all but disappeared from the world in around 500 AD, by about 500 AD. However, it was preserved in Ethiopia by both the Jews and the Christians who, as I said, had inducted it into their canons. So if you were a Christian growing up in Ethiopia, or a Jew, or an Orthodox Jew, Orthodox Christian, or Orthodox Jew, growing up in Ethiopia, you would have had the Book of Enoch, First Enoch, as part of your scriptures. It would have been considered Holy Writ. And so it was in 1773 that the Book of Enoch became reintroduced into the corpus of extra-biblical texts. And then we had, of course, R.H. Charles, who made a definitive English version back in 1912. And so the Book of Enoch is referenced actually by many of the early church fathers, including Clement and Barnabas, the friends of Paul, Irenaeus, Origen, Tertullian, Athenagoras of Athens, and Justin Martyr. And all of these, many of the church fathers held a favorable view of the Book of Enoch, and some even referenced it as Holy Scripture. Now, I'm not here to argue that the Book of Enoch should be in the canon. That question is actually quite irrelevant to me. But it's very, very fascinating because, as I said earlier, you cannot separate, you cannot extract the Enochian tale from the biblical narrative. It is foundational. And it's not just foundational in the Old Testament.
Back with more of this fascinating conversation with Tim in just a second. First, let me tell you about Medicare costs. Medicare, the costs there are a silent thief, and most people don't even know it. It's so confusing. Thousands of your dollars just vanish if you pick the wrong plan. Well, what is the right plan? There are a lot of Americans that have been taken in by slick, advisors promising great plans, only to find out later that things like copays are now bleeding them dry. Chapter is different, and I've met with these people personally, and I know that they are founding. Their founding was the cornerstone. Was the experience that they had with their own parents who got terribly taken in by some of these advisors for Medicare programs. They wanted to change that so it doesn't happen to you or everybody else. At Chapter, they don't just guide you, they search every Medicare plan from every carrier. With technology so sharp it'll cut through all of the noise, these are licensed advisors with no hidden agendas. Other Medicare advisors might cherry pick plans that pad their pockets, but Chapter will put you first. Dial pound 250 and say the keyword Chapter. That's pound 250, keyword Chapter, or go to askchapter.org/Beck. Askchapter.org/Beck. You have one chance at this. You need to make it count. Chapter is your move for anything related to Medicare. Pound 250, keyword Chapter, or askchapter.org/Beck. Okay, so before we get to where you can spot it in the New Testament and Old Testament, tell me the story of Enoch. What's the salient point here?
Okay, so Enoch begins just like in the book of Genesis. In fact, in the book of Enoch, you have ironically in Enoch chapter 6, the first few verses, just like in Genesis, you have the passage from which the passage in Genesis is derived. It reads, "And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget us children." That's where the story begins. So you have the angels of heaven looking down, lusting after the daughters of men. By the way, the designation angel, the angels of heaven, that's not just found in the Book of Enoch. That's also found in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, that the disciples of Christ were using, that the apostles were using. In Genesis 6, it reads, the angels of heaven. And this is, of course,
and they don't mean it like we would mean angels, right? Because we think of angels as this, God-worshiping being. Angels don't fall. I mean, there were, a third of the angels fell, but we're not talking about the good angels.
Okay, so we're talking about in Enoch. Enoch designates these angels as watchers. And the watcher designation is not exclusive to extra-biblical material. It's found in the book of Daniel. You'll recall that in the book of Daniel, there's this incredible scene in which Nebuchadnezzar is being judged by the holy watchers, by a council of holy watchers. And they, of course, condemn him to several years of madness in which he had the mind of an animal and was eating grass and so forth. That was a sentence that came down from the watchers. And so this is clearly hierarchical. These are hierarchical terms. The watchers are some exalted, probably members of the divine council. And they, in the book of Enoch, are lusting after the daughters of men. They decide, there's 200 of them, by the way, that are designated in the book of Enoch. They decide to descend to the earth, to the summit of Mount Hermon. They take there an oath. They bind themselves by mutual imprecations. By the way, Mount Hermon has since time immemorial been called the mountain of oath. And then the watchers, these 200 watchers, descend into the plains, and they begin to select.
What is the oath they take?
I'm sorry?
What is the oath that they take?
The oath that they take is that basically we're all in this together. And we know that this is a grave sin, that this is what we're about to do is a grave transgression against the King of heaven. And so we're all in this together, and we are all going to suffer the consequences equally, share in the consequences, whatever befall. That is a summation of the oath. So they know what they're about to do is a grave transgression. And of course, what they do is what's alluded in Genesis. They take wives, they procreate with these women, and progenerate a race of hybrid giants. And then they impart to mankind forbidden knowledge from heaven. And mankind is corrupted through this knowledge. And the giants that are born of the watchers, these are hybrid beings, part watcher, part human. They begin to devour men. They begin to devour mankind. In fact, the Book of Watchers says that men were forced to feed the giants, but the giants were devouring all of the acquisitions of the land. Their appetites were so enormous that men couldn't keep them satiated, and so the giants began to devour men. And then men began to cry out to petition heaven, and then God resolves to intervene, and through a series of judgments, he judges the watchers and their hybrid offspring, and then the flood ensues. That's an encapsulation of the story that's presented in First Enoch, in the earliest portion of First Enoch, the Book of the Watchers.
Okay, so let's go to where we see this. I mean, Peter talks about how the angels sinned. Right. Okay, tell me that.
Yeah, so as I said, this story, the Enochian tale, forms the substratum of so much of what we read in both the Old and New Testaments of the Bible. It's referenced multiple times in the Old Testament, and then we find it in the New. As you said, in 2 Peter, Peter writes that God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to Tartarus and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. And by the way, I forgot to mention that in the Book of Enoch, part of the judgment was that the watchers first would behold the destruction of their beloved sons, who would be incited to war with one another, and then the flood would ensue, and the watchers were bound and cast into Tartarus in the Book of Enoch. And so Peter's referencing that. And there is simply no precedent for this reference within the canon of Scripture, within the 66 books of the Bible. There is no reference for this. And then Jude, the brother of James, he reiterates this in Jude, in the first chapter of Jude. He writes, "And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day." And then a few verses later, Jude says, he writes this, and by the way, this is a copy and paste verbatim from the Book of Enoch. Jude writes, "Now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men also, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment on all, to convict all who are ungodly among them all of their ungodly deeds, which they have committed in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which the ungodly sinners have spoken against him." This is, as I said, verbatim from the Book of Enoch. So I think it is reasonable to conclude, based on, and there are many, many more references, by the way, to the Book of Enoch, indirect references that even Christ makes. It is reasonable, therefore, to conclude that the Enochian text must have been numbered among the scrolls in the synagogues. There must have been some iteration of what we call First Enoch today that was being referenced directly by the apostles and by the writers of the Old Testament.
Okay, so this takes us to a couple of possibilities. One, you have the demigods, from Athens and all of that, gods coming down and mating, and that's where I think it could throw people who are like, no, wait, but that's a different religion. Has nothing to do with us. And also because if I understand, you call this the elder race, they had such knowledge, and they built everything, and they gave us this knowledge. That's also where some people will say, oh, well, that's extraterrestrials that came down and gave us. But you're saying, if I'm not mistaken, both the extraterrestrial thing and the demigods thing, it is Enoch. It's this.
It is a integral part of Hebrew cosmology. This is what the Hebrews believed. Now, we've partly because of Augustine, we have forgotten this narrative. We've read it out of the biblical narrative. We've had a view of the antediluvian world that is quite incomplete and in many senses inaccurate. The ancient Hebrews clearly believed that these, and I'm going to call them extraterrestrial beings because that's precisely what they are, descended to the earth in the days of the pre-flood patriarchs. And this general narrative is ubiquitous among the primary cultures, the primary early civilizations on planet Earth. They all believe that this happened. Of course, they all have different theological perspectives on it. I mean, the ancient Egyptians referred to this as Zeptepi, the first time when the gods descended to the earth and cohabitated and commingled themselves with the daughters of men, and that these were the civilizing gods of the Mesopotamians. These were the sages, the Apkallu sages in the Mesopotamian mythologies. You find this all over the world. As I said, in every primary culture, you have this story. And the biblical narrative is no exception. And so, we read, for example, in the book of Job, that in reference to these being extraterrestrial beings, we read in the book of Job that the sons of God shouted for joy, and the morning stars sang together when God was laying the foundations of planet Earth. So what we have here is a pre-existent race of exalted beings who are not human, who are in the picture, who are in the story before the foundations of the earth are laid, and certainly before the creation of Adam. And these beings, their provenance is not planet Earth, very clearly. They come from elsewhere in the cosmos. So the term extraterrestrial simply defines a being whose provenance, whose origin is not planet Earth. That's all it means. And so I believe
but wait. If these are angels, then they would have come from a spirit world. You're saying that they're not that? They came from another planet?
I'm saying that it doesn't really matter where they come from. If their provenance is not planet Earth, they are by definition extraterrestrial. And so I think we get hung up on some of these terms, but the reality is that the Bible defines them as such, not using that kind of terminology, but the idea, the concept is certainly apparent in the biblical narrative. And I believe that the angels are very much like us, and indeed we are very much like them. In fact, I believe that the human species, that mankind was created to be the younger sibling in the family of God, and that we have elder siblings, and that's why they're referred to as the sons of God. Indeed, if you look at the genealogy of Jesus of Nazareth, it goes all the way, through David, through Abraham, all the way back into the pre-flood world, through Noah, all the way back to Adam, who is designated as the son of God. These are familial terms, and these familial terms are not incidental; they're consequential. And the idea here is that there's a family, and that's part of what the gospel of Christ is. It's the restoration of the family of God. Jesus brings us back into the Father's house, and we become the sons of God again. In the words of Christ, being sons of the resurrection. So the idea here is that there is a family, God has a family, and that there's elder siblings in this family, the sons of God who pre-exist mankind, and then Adam and his offspring were created to be the younger siblings in this family. But of course, we know the story. The tragedy is that we were divorced, sundered from that family because of sin, and now are in a state, the human condition, which is sin and death.
Everyone talks about getting older like it's just a thing you do, and, well, I mean, it is. But losing the sounds of life, the conversation, the laughter, the little moments, that's not the way you want to do it if it can be helped. It's isolating, but it doesn't have to be that way. Audion has changed what hearing technology can be. They took everything complicated about hearing aids and made it really super simple. No apps, no confusing controls, no appointments or waiting rooms. You just slip them in, you attach the touchscreen case, and you'll hear clearly again. The Atom series is lightweight, rechargeable, and designed to fit comfortably all day. And it's built by audiologists and engineered for clarity and priced so everyone can afford to listen to the world again, because hearing shouldn't be a luxury, it should be part of living well. And the first time you hear the details again, the voice you love, the songs you miss, the sound of life itself, you'll wonder why you waited so long. So don't wait. Visit audionhearing.com. Take control of your hearing today. audionhearing.com. So explain the golden age. What is the golden age?
Okay, so the golden age is Zep Tepi. It's that time that in the antediluvian world when the gods descended to the earth and cohabitated with the human species and imparted knowledge to them. This is what's referred to as the golden age. The term golden age comes from the Greeks, but the concept, as I said, is ubiquitous all over the world. And this is the time in which I believe that the megaliths were constructed, and it's a time when giants were roaming the earth, and these beings, these non-human celestial beings, were, as I said, cohabitating the earth with mankind. And this is, again, the Romans believed it, the Greeks believed it, the ancient Egyptians believed it, the Mesopotamians believed it, every primary ancient civilization.
And the golden race would have been the giants mixing with the actual humans.
The golden race is referred to as the offspring of the gods. So referring back to Zep Tepi, to the ancient Egyptian narrative, the golden race were the offspring of gods and men. And a great illustration of this, by the way, is the story of Atlantis. Plato's story of Atlantis, which is found in the Critias and Timaeus dialogue, and Plato begins the narrative, and of course he has Solon of Athens, who journeys to Egypt, and Solon is consulting with the priests of Sais in Egypt, and they're talking about their histories, and the Egyptian priests inform Solon that the history of the Greeks is infantile, that it's not hoary with age like the histories of the Egyptians. And then they proceed to tell Solon that the earth has suffered various cataclysms and that civilizations have risen and fallen in the course of antediluvian history. And they tell him the story of Atlantis. And the story of Atlantis begins with the gods who are apportioning the earth amongst themselves. They're dividing the earth up amongst themselves. And Zeus, Poseidon, for his lot, he takes the region of Atlantis. And then he builds the island and the city of Atlantis. And then what does he do? He becomes enamored of a human woman. Cleito is her name. And he weds this woman and he copulates with her, and she conceives and gives birth to 10 hybrid twins, to 5 sets of twins, hybrid sons of Poseidon, who in other sources appear to be giants. And then these giants become the kings of Atlantis. The chief among them is Atlas. And then the Atlanteans eventually become a very militaristic society, and they begin a campaign of conquest, and they're steamrolling through all the other civilizations until the priests of Sais inform Solon. They encounter the Greeks. They encounter the Athenians. And the Athenians are the only civilization that is able to withstand the conquest of the Atlanteans. And then what happens? Cataclysm ensues. There's a great cataclysm. It's a flood. And Atlantis is destroyed in a day and a night. And not just Atlantis, the entire world is destroyed in a cataclysm. And this is just one illustration. The story of Atlantis is, in many ways, an allegory of the antediluvian world. And I think, and again, this story, I believe the origin of this story is the Enochian tale, which I would contend is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, stories in the annals of human history.
Okay. So this race of people, if you will, starts with the giants who come down and they know they're doing evil. They know they're doing wrong. But then they create this, what sounds like kind of a utopian sort of world. And then they're the reason why things go so wrong that God has to get Noah to wipe everybody out?
So in the Hebrew perception of the Golden Age is quite unique, because all of the pagan cultures all view, as you rightly say, the Golden Age as a utopian paradise. That's why they call it the Golden Age. The Hebrews, however, view it as a dystopia, as a nightmarish dystopia, in which the knowledge of the Watchers corrupts mankind, and their offspring are exceedingly evil and cannibalistic, and introduce into the world a bloodlust that had not that was not previously apparent, and the Watchers lead mankind into idolatry. And this is the source for, this is the sin of the Watchers. This is the sin of the angels, again, that Peter and Jude are referencing. And this results in the judgment of the flood, the judgment of the cataclysm that ensues on planet Earth and destroys the old world, annihilates what I describe as the empire of the gods, of the Watchers and their offspring, and washes the earth, cleanses the earth of their abominable seed. And remember that in Genesis it says that the whole earth, that all flesh had corrupted its way on the earth, that all flesh was corrupted. And this corruption in the ancient Hebraic cosmological perspective was wrought by the Watchers. It's referencing, by the way, a genetic corruption. And so God sent the flood to wipe the slate clean, so to speak.
This is where it becomes so important that you would at least consider this story, because you say another golden age is coming. And I have been watching this coming golden age for a long time, and I've had conversations with the people who are bringing this golden age, and it is absolutely terrifying. And I have thought, that sounds like the mark of the beast. That sounds like this you're going to lose yourself. It's evil, the way it has been explained to me by some. So you say a new golden age is coming. Explain what that means.
So the events that led to the destruction of the old world are going to be repeated to some degree at the end of the age. We are living at the end of the age, and this phenomenon of the gods commingling themselves with the offspring of with the daughters of men, and this idea of hybrid beings and everything that was done in the antediluvian world, the corruption of all flesh, I think is again going to be repeated to some extent, not exactly in the same way. Mm-hmm. So when I set out to write my book Birthright, it was prompted by a question that I had been ruminating on for a while, and the question is simply this, and this question, by the way, is a question that is unique to our times, and has not really been something that earlier generations have had to contemplate, but we have to contend with this question right now. And it's simply this: what does it mean to be a human being? And is our humanity worth preserving? That is the most imperative question that we can ask. Those are the most imperative questions that we can ask today. And because we are on the brink of what I describe as a post-human apocalypse. And we are advancing at an alarming pace toward the end of humanity as we know it. And this is not alarmism. This is not hyperbole. This is exactly what the futurists and the technologists are saying. You have, of course, you have Harari out there. Ray Kurzweil,
he's worse.
That's right. Harari. You have these different futurists out there who are predicting the end of humanity in the next 100 years. There will be in the next 100 to 130 years, there will be no more human beings left on planet Earth. Well, what do they mean? It's because we are, in some sense, building the mechanism of our own destruction right now. We are creating the tools that are going to enable us to redefine human biology, to remake Adam. And really what it amounts to is to become something other than Adam. This is called post-human. And where we are right now.
And you're talking specifically about transhumanism.
That's precisely what I was about to say.
The merging of man and machine.
That's exactly right. We're over here. We're still human. We're going to a post-human condition. Again, what I refer to as a post-human apocalypse. And the transitional period between this is called transhuman. And that's precisely why it's called transhumanism, because it's a transition. The term it indicates a transition. It's transitory from human to post-human. So we're human right now, but in the future, we are going to become something other than human. And from the secular, atheistic, Darwinian perspective, who cares, right? Who cares? Because there's nothing sacred about being human. I mean, there's nothing in their worldview that makes the human being anything other than an animal with a bigger brain, right? However, the biblical narrative is quite different. The biblical narrative defines mankind as I said earlier, as being created in the image and likeness of God and was created to be a member of the family. That Adam was a son of God, given authority on earth. He was bequeathed dominion of the earth. This is the birthright of Adam. And so we bear the image of God, and it's really important to understand what it means from a theological perspective, what it means to be a human being. And then to answer the question, is our humanity worth preserving? Well, from a theological perspective, the answer is unequivocally yes. Not only is it worth preserving, it is imperative that we preserve it because we have a Savior. We have a kinsman redeemer in Christ Jesus who became one of us. He became a man in order to redeem mankind. So there's only one qualification for redemption in the cross of Christ. You must be human. You can be a sinner until you take your last breath. You can be like the thief on the cross, who was a criminal, but who looks at Christ before he dies and acknowledges him as the Son of Man, as the Son of God, and he has saving faith. So you can be. There is grace for the human to the very end of his life to receive Christ, but there's the qualification for the human. So we become disqualified from salvation in the cross of Christ if we become something other than human. So the stakes could not be higher here when we talk about transhumanism and posthumanism. So for the atheist, from the Darwinian perspective, this is just the natural course of human development. We are directing the course of our own evolution, and we are determined to become like the gods and to gain immortality and all of the extraordinary capabilities that are going to be available through the agency of technology to the post-human. And we are accelerating in that direction.
I know. Back with the final chapter with Tim in just a second. Let me tell you about Chirp. Back and neck pain have a way of creeping into everything. And if you've tried stretches and massages and endless appointments that never seem to last, Chirp is about to make that change. Chirp delivers real relief at home. Now, the flagship is the Chirp Contour. It's a powerful 3-in-1 system combining spinal decompression, massage, and heat therapy in one compact unit. I use this several days a week. It automatically adjusts to your back. It lets you customize the pressure, soft, deep tissue, or contoured, and even saves your favorites for the next time. Faster relief, lower cost, and you never have to leave the house. For targeted relief, the Chirp Halo also is a wearable wireless TENS EMS technology, has magnetic attachments, so it locks right into that spot that hurts the most, all controlled by the Chirp app. And for daily stretching and mobility, Chirp wheels are a game changer. Right now, you get early access to their Black Friday savings, $100 off the Chirp Contour, $40 off the Chirp Halo, plus discounts on the Halo pads, RPM, blah, 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 and also discounts on the relief wheels. So go to chirp.com, sign up now for early access. It's chirp.com. Sign up, get in, grab the savings while they last until Black Friday. Go chirp.com. I urge you to read something like Ray Kurzweil's Age of Spiritual Machines. You will understand that these people who do not believe in the soul or God or anything else have created something. And as Kurzweil has told me himself, you'll be able to soon merge with the machine. This was him 2010 maybe telling me this. You're going to be able to merge with the machine. And he said because it will be moving too fast. You will have infinite knowledge, all of this stuff, that if you don't understand the sacredness of the soul, it sounds like a golden age. You will be able to access everything. And then he starts in with, and you won't have to carry a wallet because everything will be stored, and what you implant in you will become part of you. And you'll think differently, and you'll be able to hive mind. And that's not being a human. And I said, Ray, what if you want to remain human? And he said, why would you? And I said, because, I kind of like the original model. And he told me, well, then you will have to be isolated because you'll be a problem for everybody else. So anybody said everybody's going to want to do this. And I think a lot of people will want to do this. But I come back to where you're driving, that, when you read about taking the mark of the beast, there is no salvation for you. Once you take it, it's over. You can't untake it. You can't be redeemed at all. It's the same with this. Once you become transhuman, you can't undo that. And right. You've lost your right to salvation. And so you cannot be saved. That starts to make that scripture in Revelation work.
Precisely right.
All of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, yes, because you're not human.
And many more. You can't buy and sell anymore. right? I mean, think
Yeah,
about it.
I know all of it.
So right now, you could probably maybe run a business without a cell phone, without access to the internet, let's say, but it would be really, really hard, right? So that technology that we have in our hands, that our cell phones, the technology we hold in our hands is going into our brains very soon. It is going into the cerebral cortex. And rather than surfing the internet with our thumbs, we're going to be surfing the internet with this accomplice, artificial intelligence, through the speed of thought. We will be interacting with the compendium of human knowledge at the speed of thought. As soon as this technology, as soon as we merge with the machines and also with artificial intelligence. So how are you, if you just want to be an old-fashioned, homegrown, organic human being who's going to try and compete in that environment? Think about young people going to university and they decide, you know what, I don't want to upgrade. I don't want the upgrades. I don't want the enhancements. I don't want to put the technology into my biology. I don't want the chip in my cerebral cortex. How is that person going to compete with all of the transhuman, with all of the transhuman students who are accessing the compendium of human information at the speed of thought?
It would be as if you are walking into a room and there's one person there that has an IQ of 20.
Precisely right.
They can't function. I can't have a conversation with you. I can't do anything.
That's right.
Because you have an IQ of 20. And that was Ray's point. Nobody wants that. Everybody wants it. And the way it's described and what you're seeing on the horizon, it is going to be described as a golden age.
It is. It is. And you know what's happening here is we're going full circle back to the beginning, because our story begins in the Garden of Eden. And the temptation of the serpent was, if you eat of this fruit, surely you will not die. You will become like the gods. You will become like the gods. So it's the same temptation. And what's happening here is we are succumbing to a Faustian bargain. We are about to sell our birthright for a bowl of stew. For the advances and the advantages of posthumanism, of transhumanism, the enhancements, we are going to give away the most precious thing that we have, which is our humanity. And that's why, and you can see the slow march. You can see the cunning of the serpent, how the ground has been laid for this eventuality, that the human being has been degraded. It started with Darwin, and then it progressed from there. The gradual erosion of human worth, and not worth as an individual, but worth as a species. If you're just a product of evolution, if you're just the cousin of a monkey, then there are no guardrails. There are no guardrails. Yeah. Who cares? It doesn't mean anything to be a human being, and there's no reason whatsoever to preserve our humanity. This is where the gospel of Christ is so important, especially for Christians to anchor themselves in the gospel of Christ. Because, as I said, Jesus is a kinsman redeemer who became a man to redeem mankind. And so I'm stressing whenever I get the opportunity to talk to young people that you need to understand the worth of your humanity. The worth of your humanity, and don't be beguiled into exchanging it, into selling your birthright for a bowl of stew, for life extension, and for all of the extraordinary capabilities that are going to become available. We are living right now in what technologists and futurists call the hybrid age. And the reason why they describe this as the hybrid age is because in the past, you have various streams of technology that were being independently developed. These are the famous GRIN technologies, for example. You had genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology. Those are the four big ones. And they're being developed, each one of them as a separate stream. But today, in our time, these streams are coalescing. They're coming together. And so you now have, for example, you can take artificial intelligence, you could take artificial intelligence and insert it into a Tesla robot. And now you have an autonomous robotic being, which in the future is going to be, by the way, policing our streets, fighting our wars, This goes for genetics, for nanotechnology. We haven't even yet entered into the genetic revolution. That's coming. By the way, there's a book. I don't know if you've read the book. Trying to remember the name of the woman who wrote the book. It's called Countdown, and she predicts in the book that the sperm count of males in the West is going to 0 by 2045. In other words, we're reaching the end of our genetic rope, and lo and behold, what are we developing right now? Artificial wombs. And we are perfecting in vitro fertilization. We're reaching the end of our genetic rope, and the only way that the human species is going to be able to continue to breed, to populate, is through artificial wombs in the future. We're already, the constructs, the framework of this post-human, again, apocalypse, not utopia, apocalypse, is being constructed right in front of our eyes.
Is there a line that you have in your mind? Is there I'll do this, but I won't do that? I mean,
that's a very good question.
That's the scary part of this. Is it's such a slippery slope. It's such a blurry line at the beginning that you don't exactly know. It'll be easier to spot in 10 years, 15 years. Right now, today, in the next 5 years, it's going to be really slippery and hard.
Yes, it will, especially for our kids and our grandkids.
Right.
So, yeah, I have some guardrails. So, you have to talk about each one of these technologies separately, which we don't have time for. But let's talk about genetic technology. So right now, we have very effective genetic technologies that we're developing and improving. For example, we have gene therapy. Gene therapy is if I have a gene that's mutated and it's causing cancer, it's causing some other genetic disorder, you can take that same gene from another human genome, and that's the key, from another human genome that has the correct code that's not mutated, and you can take it and splice it into my genome and correct the code, right? That's human to human genetic modification. I've got no problem with that because it's human to human. We're not altering the genetic matrix of the human species that God designed. But once we start going beyond that, once we start doing one of two things, creating new sequences or integrating sequences from other kinds of creatures, then we're crossing that species barrier. We are now entering into cross-species genetics, which, by the way, is explicitly prohibited in the Bible. So cross-species genetics, this is one of the great sins of the Watchers, by the way. They engaged in miscegenation, the mixing of species. And so that's a clear guardrail to me. Human to human gene therapy, gene modification, I'm fine with. But as soon as you cross the species barrier or you start creating new information to insert into the human genome, you have transgressed the order of creation.
Yes. I have to tell you, I don't know, because I haven't read everything that you have read, but I am going to be reading a lot of your work. But I think your conclusion at the end is absolutely solid. I feel it. I feel we are in the end of days. I mean, even Elon Musk says, there won't be I got to get to Mars because there won't be humans left on Earth. And yet he's doing the transhumanism thing himself. But the signs are all here. We just have to be awake enough. And I think the story that you have just told, which I have a lot of homework to do on, but the story you've just told gives us the pattern of what to look for and the pattern that is coming. And I think you're right. Thank you for all of the hard work. You know what? I don't think if you would have stayed in school and gone to university, I don't think you would have had this. You wouldn't have gotten here because you would have been thinking in the box.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Thank you so much. God bless.
Well, thank you.
I hope we can talk again.
It was my pleasure, of course.